here. So a quick welcome to everybody. Welcome to this PCR webinar version 1. We have one a little bit late today for another set of time zones, but this day is the first one. So the agenda is as follows. First of all, we have our PCR manager from the EPD Secretariat, Gustav Sandin, who will share a guide for the PCR and the PCR development process, and hopefully answer any questions you may have. After that, we have our esteemed guest, Anna Bortoluzzi, who will present the development of PCRs, a voice from the field, and the presentation from her perspective as a PCR moderator. After that, we'll have a time for a live Q&A if anybody who has additional questions. We also have the opportunity to ask questions in the chat during the presentation, but will be answered by Adam from the EPD Secretariat. So if there are no questions, I give the floor to Gustav, please.
Thank you, Julia. I think you are now seeing the presentation. Excellent. I'm very happy to see so many here today and to talk about PCRs and how to develop PCRs. And as Julia said, if you have a question, you can ask them in the chat during the presentation or at the Q&A session after Anna's presentation. I will talk about 10 to 15 minutes about PCR and PCR development. But first, let me just say a few words about myself. My name is Gustav Sandin. I'm the LSA and PCR manager of EPD International. We are a small PCR team that are here to help you if you have any support questions related to PCRs. And just a few notes about the international EPD system as well. I think that's good to say something. We are the oldest EPD system in the world, founded 26 years ago. This spring, we celebrated the 25 years since the first EPD was published in 1998, which was by Vattenfall on hydropower. And we offer EPD services based on ISO 14025. And we are a fully owned subsidiary of IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institutes. So that's short about EPD International. And we had an EPD webinar in May. You may watch that afterwards as well if you want to. But today the focus is on EPDs, or sorry, PCRs. So the agenda is, what are product categories? 5 minutes on that. 5 minutes on how is a PCR developed, and then 5 minutes on what questions to consider in PCR development. A PCR is a document that provides the rules for developing an EPD for a specific product category. And the most important parts of a PCR are the rules on the LCA, how to calculate the LCA. It's about system boundary, function unit, allocation rules, and other LCA questions. The other part is on EPD content. What content has to be in the EPD? And this is not about it's not just about LCA results, but it's also about the content declaration of the product, the additional environmental, social, economic sustainability information in DPD, and other content in DPD. The PCR is a supplement to the general program instructions, which is another document that sets the rules, not just the basic LCA rules and the basic rules on EPD content, but also the rules for governing and operating the international EPD system. And the PCR shall only include specifications, additions, and deviations to the GPI. So PCR is a shorter document than the GPI. And you will especially see this as of the next version of the GPI, which we intend to publish in the first half of 2024, where we intend the PCR document to be a shorter document, not repeating any text in the GPI. But these two documents together, the GPI, which apply for all our product categories, and the PCR, which is for a specific product category, together are the cookbooks in the PCR kitchen. So when you cook the meal, which is the EPD, you need a cookbook, and these are the two main cookbooks. And then for specific product categories, there might be standards externally, like EN 1584 for construction products, that can also be considered a cookbook. But there are a set of documents where PCR is a very important document in developing EPDs. And in our PCR library, which is the largest PCR library in the world, we have more than 100 valid PCRs available, free to download. Please check them out. We cover a lot of product categories, but not all. And that's why we're going to talk about PCR development today, because we are open to developing new PCRs for product categories not covered in our existing PCR library. And to set the PCRs and the GPI in relation to other governing documents of the international EPD system, we can look at the documents as a pyramid, where we have the organizational standards at the bottom, the LCA standards, the EPD standards. We also have common rules within ECO platform, which is a collaboration platform among EPD program operators. And then we have the program-specific documents, the GPI. Then we have the product-specific standards as well, which exist for some product categories, but not all. And then we have the product category rules. And then we also have something called CPCRs, complementary PCRs, which is even more specific rules for a subcategory within a product category. For example, we have a PCR on construction products, and then we have CPCRs on cement, windows and doors, elevators, for example. And as I mentioned before, the GPI is now being updated, and the draft of GPI 5 will soon be on 2-month open consultation. And so keep your eyes open in your email box, because many of you will get an invitation by email or at the website. And we expect this to be published in the first half of 2024. And some rules in the GPI, for example, on verification, are implemented immediately or within 90 days, whereas LCA rules are implemented when PCRs are updated or when new PCRs are developed. This is important to understand. So this is a relationship between our governing documents. This was an introduction about what PCRs are. Let's look at PCR development then. And the PCR development process is very important for the acceptance and reliability of the PCR document. It's an open, transparent, and participatory process following an ISO standard, ISO 14027, which makes the process quite established and predictable. This is done by a working group, which is called the PCR committee, which is led by the PCR moderator, which is the chair of the working group. There are some requirements to be able to develop a PCR. In essence, it's a market-driven approach. It depends on the initiative on the market, usually manufacturers, industry associations, or LCA consultants with an interest in a specific product category. And when there is no available PCR, they may initiate the development of one and form a PCR committee. And for us to accept the PCR committee and the eventual PCR, the PCR committee needs to have LCA and product categories expertise. The PCR moderator shall have project management skills. So the moderator doesn't necessarily need to be an LCA expert, but it needs to be able to handle the PCR committee and lead the work. The process typically takes 10 to 12 months. It can be quicker, for example, with CPCRs, as these are usually shorter documents. And it can take longer times in case of a complex product category or many comments received in the open consultations, for example. And there are no costs in developing a PCR. except the time spent by the involved parties. So we don't charge anything, but we don't fund PCR development either. In the end, a PCR developed in our program is under our copyright, so we own the document, but it may be adopted by other EPD programs if we have a mutual recognition agreement. In the same way, we adopt other PCRs from other programs if we have an MRA. This is to avoid too many parallel PCRs existing in the world within the sector. And we have a long-term vision of one PCR per product category globally. This is something we work towards. But if there's a need for new PCR and an initiative is taken by an industry to develop such a PCR, the process for developing it consists of 5 steps, which I will go through here. First, the initiation, as I briefly talked about, and this is done formally by submitting a PCR development checklist. So this is a document that we provide on our website in which you fill in certain information about the name of the PCR, suggested scope of the PCR, as well as information on the PCR committee, PCR moderator, and also a short communication plan on how you are to inform relevant stakeholders about the initiated PCR development. It's very important here that you do inform relevant stakeholders, for example, manufacturers and industry associations, and that you are open for them to join the PCR committee, because this is an open participatory process. Of course, within reasonable limits, the PCR committee cannot be too big to work in a functional way. But in essence, it's an open process that anyone can take part in if they want to. And then you submit this PCR development checklist to the Secretariat, to me basically, and we, after some communication back and forth, usually approve the PCR development process, and we announce it on our website and in our information channels. After this, the PCR committee develops the first draft PCR based on the template that we provide, as well as a stakeholder list, which is a longer list of different kinds of stakeholders to invite to the next step, the open consultation. And this is the most important step in PCR development. This is where it gets the acceptance of the industry. And this also highly increases the quality of the PCR, usually, because you get input from different expertise on what to consider in the PCR development. And this is a 2-month period under which any stakeholder can comment on the draft. After the open consultation, the draft is updated based on the comments received, and all comments need to be responded on. And we have a template also for that. And then it's resubmitted to the Secretariat. The Secretariat do a pre-review and then send it for review to the PCR review panel, which is the technical committee of the International EPD system. This is about 15 LCA experts that work pro bono for the International EPD system. And then they do an independent review of the quality of the PCR, to whether it complies with the GPI, whether the product-specific rules are justified, and whether the comments under the open consultation have been sufficiently handled. And the open consultation together with the review are the most important part in the process, because they ensure that the final document is accepted by the industry, is seen as reliable and trustworthy outside the industry as well, and is of high quality. And finally, after usually some back and forth communication between the review panel and the PCR committee, the document is approved, published at our website, free for anyone to use to develop EPDs. A final PCR is valid for 4 years normally, and then updated following the same procedure as you see here. And it's important that it's a limited validity period with regular updates in order to keep the document updated according to latest LCA developments and latest developments of standards. During the validity period, the PCR moderator shall remain the contact person for input on the PCR or editorial clarifications done as minor updates of the PCR, which are done continuously. And also to support if there are unclarities in the applicability of for a certain product. Yes. So that's the development process, and all necessary documents for PCR developments are available at our website. The final part of the presentation, important methodological questions for PCR development. As I said, most things are set in our general GPI, the basic LCA rules, the basic requirements on EPD content, but there are some opportunities to be more specific in the PCR. Important question is whether to have a functional or declared unit. If a functional unit, how it shall be defined. How to quantify the product performance provided during a certain time period, which we call the reference service life. Also important are what shall be the system boundaries for the LCA. This is about specifying the general description of system boundaries of the GPI, which is described in very general terms. So here you describe it more precisely for the processes typically involved for that product category. And this also connects to data quality requirements. So what core processes or even upstream processes shall specific data be required, for example? Important question in LCA is if there are any multifunctional processes that needs to be handled with allocation rules. And there are general allocation rule sets in the GPI, but you can here be more specific for certain processes that are typical for your product category. Another thing is what indicators, and this covers both environmental impact and resource use, that shall be declared in EPD. And we have a default list of indicators in the GPI and on our website. But an EPD shall cover all relevant environmental aspects of the product category. This means that some of the indicators in the default list may not be relevant and doesn't need to be declared. And there can also be a need to declare additional indicators. In the end, an EPD shall cover all relevant environmental aspects, and this is ensured by the PCR. And then there might be specific rules for content declaration, for example, specific problematic content in a product category that needs to be highlighted in the content declaration. There might also be specific rules for the additional environmental, social, economic information that can be included at the end of the EPD and that are not based on the LCA. And this can be both about the organizational performance, certifications of the organization, but it can also be related to the product as such. For example, guidance on how to treat it at end of life or any other information that is relevant in terms of sustainability. So that's a little bit about PCRs, what they are, how they are developed, and some things to think about when you develop PCRs. Here you have my contact information, and now I'm very happy to leave the floor to Anna, and then we have some Q&As after that.
Thank you, Gustav.
Thank you, Gustav.
Great stuff.
So I try to share my screen. And okay. And you just tell me if it is all right. Does it works?
Yes.
Wonderful. That's it.
Thank you, Anna.
Okay, much different from last time. So what I will try to do is to give you something from the field, how it works when you are a PCR moderator. So I try not to overlap with Gustav, and we'll have a trip through just a journey through methods and little tricks and lesson learned. I couldn't put in my presentation any example because the time is so short, but I give you some gifts. So Julia received the bibliography, and this is a gift from me for new PCR moderators. And I go through in question and answers. If you want examples, I can give you more details. So let's go through this. This is my group. We are 2 universities, 2 LCA labs of universities, and a consulting company. And this is the team that I manage for PCRs. So back to basic. Exactly, remember you have to use the GPI. Remember that we have a lot of tasks as a PCR moderator, but I read this part of the GPI as a list of tasks that go through a process. So if you look at this carefully, you see the process that the PCR moderator has to develop. Okay, this goes through the process. And I remind you that we have the templates that helps you a lot to manage the PCR committee. Okay, this is the starting point, but I go back to tools and methods. So what are the tools and the methods that you can use to manage your role? First of all, on my personal opinion, this is just my experience, my presentation, my opinion. So I hope Gustav will correct me if he doesn't agree with what I'm saying. On my point of view, the development of PCR requires focus on goals. You must take your committee on the goals. Which are the goals? We have the goals quite detailed in the brochure of the international APD system, because the PCR must provide support for organization that want to develop the APDs and want to have they have a goal set on the brochures, what the APD is, the value of the APD. So the PCR must also be clearly for verifiers. So we have 2 stakeholders at the moment, and the brochures are found very useful. The development of the PCR requires language and writing. So you have some of the documents I'm talking about in the bibliography you will receive. I've been using in the last years this very clear document from ISO. It's an old document. It's not really easy to find because now ISO has new documents to support those writing ISO standards. But I found this very useful for writing, support for writing. If you appreciate the methods of writing, I also suggest the handbook for technical writing. So you write the PCR in plain language. You take care of verbal forms. This is in the GPI as well, and so on. You are developing a standards. Then the development of a PCR requires management of a structure and content. So I found very useful, before starting writing the PCR, to create a structure with the key principles. Key principles are easier to share if you create a structure. So at the very beginning, I do not follow the template at first. I do prepare a structure. To share key principles is very useful because it takes the team focus on the objectives, on the goals, and it's very useful to share with the technical committee as well, as we have done for the packaging PCR, and we have recently done for the PCR for waste and recovery recycling. So this is useful for focusing on goals. But the development of PCR requires the management of a team. So, on my point of view, on the right side, you have two documents, very useful, not young, quite old, that I use very efficiently in my management of teams, and you will receive those. Well, one point is, are you able to assess the skill of the participants? On my opinion, you should have a structured process to analyze the skill of the participants, because when you write a PCR, so at the second point, you also need technique to involve people, to involve the participants of your PCR committee. So these documents will be very useful. Then, at the end, the development of a PCR requires the management of time, so project management skills. And I think the worst enemy of the PCR moderator, of course, is time, because nobody has enough time, and the PCR requires a lot of it. I have just two pieces of advice. The first, try to get things right at first time, of course. And something that comes from the school of coaching that I come from, that is the strategy school of the Palo Alto school, is to start later in order to arrive earlier. If you start slowly but carefully, then you will be sure to arrive earlier. Don't be too obsessed with time at the very beginning. Start slowly, but sure to put all things at the correct point, and then you will arrive earlier. Little tricks and lesson learned. Okay. Lesson learned, take care of your team. In many occasions, not always, but in many occasions, we split the team to reduce the workload. Then we have an experienced but small team that take the task of preparing the draft from the technical point of view based on the templates. And then we share this with the PCR committee that meets as a whole. One trick, when we draft in words, in many changes and comments, the documents becomes unreadable. So we have some tricks that you can read on my slide for writing with the committee. Second point, use the project validation approach. So if you have, like we have, a close-knit group of experts, we have more than 10 years of experience on drafting PCRs, so you can choose one of those, just participate to the initial phase and then stay on the sidelines. Why? Because at the end, he or she can play a critical role. This is what we call the project validation approach. The person has the experience and is aligned with our approach, that they can give a value at the critical point at the end of the development of PCR. So we have also a little trick. I leave you the reading of the trick afterwards. Go quickly to another lesson learned, business and market thinking. You write for the organization that will develop the APD using the PCR. So this organization will invest resources to support the business. Remind this and remember this and remind this to all the team, the PCR committee. When you write a PCR, please consider the competitive factors and establish requirements to allow companies to compete fairly. compete fairly is a task that you must remember, and you put requirements in the PCR in order to allow companies to compete fairly. The PCR also needs to take into account requirements of legislators and also stakeholders like NGOs. So what we do, as legislators and NGOs are rarely represented in the committee, their absence can be compensated by simulation activities. And is exactly what we do. We, at a certain point of the development of the PCR, we ask the committee, what if you are a legislator, what if you are an NGO and you read this PCR and you ask questions? Okay. Do not go into the field without adequate skills. So the skills of the PCR committee members are a critical factor, always. The skills more often underestimated are the technical ones, but they provide important guarantees for the setting of the requirements in the PCR. So please, we have a lot of examples of this. If you think you have not enough technical skills, add them. And I did this as a PCR moderator. At a certain point, I decided I didn't have enough skills, and I put more person and more expert in the PCR committee just to have all I need in terms of technical skills. If your team does not seem homogeneous or technical in terms of technical skills, provide free training. We did this. We provided free training. It's always worthwhile. The last one, when you explore a new territory, like we have done with the packaging PCR, please, the LCA approach is quite innovative. Take precautions. Keep up to date with the legislation and technical standards, and develop the definition sector in the PCR. Start the PCR with the definition section, especially when they have global validity. Please take care of the state of the art in different countries through the existing standardization. And then the value of PCR development, we already know that when we create standards, we have a value in sharing technical knowledge, and we contribute to the evolution of the state of the art. But what is the value of PCR moderator? We have in this role an holistic view of the problems. We share technical and scientific content with committee and a wider expert community. We grow and develop as a professional, and it's a great adventure. At the end, something personal, more than my short bio, I must say that I've been writing standards since 1992, and I am a business coach. So my work is to facilitate design teams in the automotive sector. So I started this journey with the right skills to manage teams. And what you have seen as something very personal is my personal journey. Every PCR moderator has one, and invite you to discover yours. This is my point of view and my experience.
Thank you very much, Anna. So that was Gustav and Anna sharing their knowledge. Let me check here if there's anyone who wants to ask a question to Anna or Gustav directly. I see if
we have anything left in the chat at least.
I have, while you think, I have three things I would like to emphasize that I came to think about. First, the global perspective is important when developing PCRs. sometimes we see that PCR committee is very focused on a specific country, for example. So the global perspective is important because our PCRs shall be globally applicable and relevant. And this is important both when forming the PCR committee, when developing the stakeholder list to be invited to the open consultation, but also when setting rules in the PCR. Anna mentioned definitions, very important to have terms and definitions that are globally acceptable. And this might require some balancing between different terms and some consultations, also external from the PCR committee to find the right terminology and some footnotes saying that in this country or this region, this term is known with this term instead. So you might, that's the first thing. The other thing is just to emphasize that there needs to be a PCR to develop an EPD. So if you cannot develop an EPD unless there is a PCR, just for clarification. And the third thing is the question we often get is why initiate the PCR development? Why should you as an organization take that initiative? And one is, of course, that if you want an EPD publication, you need to do that, or you need to encourage someone else to do it. But also, of course, the benefit is that you become a front runner. This is both beneficial in terms of marketing potentially, but also as it gives you influence of the future rules. Of course, it's an open process, so others may also contribute. But of course, if you are in a PCR committee, you have a more influential role. That's an important benefit, I think. So let's see if we have more questions now.
I think we do. Anna Maria.
Hello, I'm Anna Maria. I come from Slovenia. I'm currently here with Maurizio Fermeglia in University of Trieste. So I'm pretty familiar with what you do. Very impressive, I would say. I am getting a lot of requirements from the companies to do the EPD because also in the process of ESGs, they really need it to compare their products. So you say the process takes 1 year to produce it. I think it's quite long. Do you think can we make it a bit shorter, or because they want it now? You know how it works on the field, yeah. This is the first question, and the second is you said okay, the two of us can do an EPD at the same time. So which one will be valid, or what is the process here?
Let's take the first question first.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, it takes time, up to 1 year or longer. That's much quicker than a PCR development, for example, or developing an EN standard. So I think in relationship to other developments, it's predictable and quite quick. So far, we have the opportunity for pre-certified EPDs as part of the development process. You can pre-certify an EPD, it's valid for 1 year. You verify it to the GPI, and then you update it once the PCR is available. In GPI 5, we are considering to remove this option, but you make comment on the draft GPI. But so far, this is an option. So if you initiate a PCR development process today, you can already, after the initiation, have a pre-certified EPDs. And then there was a second question.
May I add something to Anna Maria? Okay, I've been developing standards at every level, but the quickest process I've ever experienced is with the International EPD system. So I think that Gustav has an average because you do not have enough time to work with the PCR committee and do your professional work as well. But I thought that Gustav and all the team are very effective. And when I had to go quick to publish the PCR, they helped me to do it. So it's really the quickest process I ever tested in my life.
And then there was a second question. I lost it. Can you repeat? It was about EPDs, having several EPDs published.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
What do you mean several EPDs? Or you mean
So,
several
for
PCRs?
example, several PCRs, yeah.
Okay.
For example, we have a committee, right? And then 2 persons at the same time try to develop a PCR. So how will we make it, like, which one will be the right one, or do we work together, or what's the plan here?
If you develop in our system, we try to make PCRs that do not overlap, so we don't have parallel PCR developments with the same scope. Of course, there can be developments initiated in other programs. The first part of PCR development, which I did not emphasize that much in my presentation, is to map the landscape of available PCRs, not to do a PCR development without reason. Of course, if we sometimes we need a mutual recognition agreement to adopt other PCRs, or they are just too different from our rules, so we can't adopt them. So we try to avoid developing PCR, but yes, there is always a risk, especially in the most developed sectors, in the construction sector, for example, where EPDs are used a lot. There are a lot of PCRs. We try to avoid it, but sometimes it happens. Yes. But in most sectors, we are the only actors, and then we are basically the only one providing PCRs, and then there shouldn't be no risk of parallel PCRs.
Great, thank you.
I think this is I can comment that the risk of several PCRs is because this is a market-driven voluntary approach to EPDs in its essence. It's not the authorities setting these rules you have to follow, although authorities more and more refer to EPDs in different contexts. But yeah, we try to minimize. We also work a lot with harmonization in eco platform, for example, to make sure that our PCRs and the interpretations of standards are as close as possible with other EPD programs. So,
may I say just one thing, Gustav, just to encourage when you're opening new sectors, please think that is sharing value with all the sector. Don't develop a PCR from the very beginning on a small piece, on a small product of that sector. Please try to think big, like we did on packaging, that was in thousands of pieces, and we try to collect everything in one main PCR.
yes, very important. We aim for as broad PCRs as possible, but still keeping the rules relevant. And in a PCR, if you have a broad PCR, you might have specific guidance for specific materials or there might be variations in function that you can handle within one PCR. So you can have guidance for subcategories of a product category within a PCR. But it's an administrative hell if we're going to have a PCR for each little component.
But it's not useful as well if you want to compare products in the same sector. That is impossible, and comparison is something that is a value for companies. So if you are just developing small pieces of products of a sector, this is not a value for anyone. So be courageous, and try to develop a reference PCR.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. We have about 2 minutes left. Are there any additional questions for Gustav and or Sara? Sorry, Anna. It seems not. And we're anyway. Oh, sorry.
I just say Adam and I will stay in the chat and answer the few questions here that are coming late. So don't worry about that.
Yes, we will also share the presentations from today, also as well as a video recording when we have after today when we have the later webinar. So it will be available for you to check out afterwards this. And as Gustav said, any additional questions left in the chat, Gustav and Adam will manage. And of course, we have the contact information for Gustav and all the information on environdoc.com for our other functions. So thank you very much for attending. It was a pleasure presenting, at least I hope for the other guys. And have a lovely day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. Bye-bye.